Tape these. My children told me that I should video my classes, and I put them up on the internet so you can see them. You go find them on YouTube. If you go to my website, the top of it is my professional engineering website, and the second one is my professional author website. If you look at the educator tab or button, it'll lead you to all the classes, and there's lots of classes in there. Whenever I teach a class, I put up the slide sets, and I also put up the videos now, so you can find those. And if you happen to walk in front, you'll be on the show. That's all right. This is a different kind of class. I do not teach doctrine. I do not teach theology. I really don't like to teach opinion. Because, you know, you don't care about my opinion, right? And I don't really care about your opinion. What I want to know is what can we prove? What do we know about history and linguistics, or the language and the culture, right? Because the biggest problem we have, and I'm going to get into this, you know, we're talking about a document. We'll talk about this document in just a second. I have the introduction stuff too. Who cares, right? I should mention this. Yeah, I do German. I claim German and kind of English. So if I speak English all right, that's a positive thing, right? I started studying ancient languages. I started studying Anglo-Saxon back in high school. It's a dead language. It's really cool. It's the beginnings of English. So because English is such an interesting and strange language, I wanted to study Anglo-Saxon. But I started studying ancient Greek to write the book, The Second Mission. In it, there are a lot of translations, and in the book I don't claim to do the translations, but actually I did a lot of the translation work. It was early in when I was just learning about how to work with Greek. Ancient Greek, because I do classical Greek, sometimes called Athenian classical Greek. I don't do Koinean Greek, and I'll explain what that means in a minute. I have started doing some ancient Hebrew because, you know, people get excited when you start saying, well, I'm going to teach a class on, for example, a New Testament document, like Acts. And then they say, well, can you teach one on Ruth, or Joshua, or, you know, and those are Old Testament, and those are Hebrew. Well, I don't teach theology and doctrine. I teach the history, the language, and the culture. So I had to learn some Hebrew. So I'm not a Hebrew expert. I'm not a rabbi. But, you know, to me, I know a little bit about Hebrew. Mostly Greek. Do Greek. I write about languages and culture. If you read any of my books, you'll see that all of them are really endued. All of them are really involved in languages and culture. Because to me, languages are the culture, and the culture is a language, and that's how you know about people and things. So again, that's why we're looking at Acts. Here's the books. I bring them. I sell them for 15 bucks each, 3 for 40, because there's one of them that's a series of 3. So if you want to read the science fiction series, they're entertaining. Ask your friends. If they liked them, then you might. If you don't say anything. No. Go ahead. I try to write even more entertainingly than I lecture or speak, so hopefully they're good. Now, getting into the Acts. First of all, let's talk about this document a little bit. I've got more on that. I've got some early stuff here to talk about what manuscripts mean. But Acts is written in what language? Greek. It's a Greek document. Okay, it is claimed to be written in Koinean Greek. Now, Koinean Greek, hear me out, is what we call Universal Greek for that period. Unfortunately, many people don't really understand what Koinean Greek is very well. Koinean Greek comes right out of Classical Greek. For many years, however, in looking at, for example, documents of the New Testament, there was a funny assumption because we didn't know of any other documents that were written in Koinean Greek at the time. Subsequently, we have found lots of documents in Koinean Greek. Guess what Koinean Greek is really close to? Classical Athenian Greek. Now, the pronunciations are different, but we got issues with that too. I don't know if I have my slide up here. Let me talk about that a little bit. I may have a slide up here, but sometimes I get jumbled in my mind because I got all kinds of really good information in here. But, for example, How do you pronounce ancient Greek? Well, I don't know. Nobody knows. There's 4 ways of pronouncing ancient Greek. You can pronounce it pre-Erasmunsian. You can pronounce it Erasmunsian. You can pronounce it in a classical way that we think classical Greek may be, and you can pronounce it as a modern Greek. You know what? They're all wrong. We don't know. How do you pronounce Elizabethan English, like Shakespearean English? We don't know. Some people think that Shakespearean English is very akin to Appalachian type dialects. Well, I don't know. Sure sounds, would you like to hear? Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo? Right? So, I don't know. But I do know that languages change, and they change over time. The pronunciations in English change radically. If anyone ever studied Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, or that's Middle English, or how about Beowulf? That's Anglo-Saxon. You know, I do Anglo-Saxon. Anglo-Saxon, all of our major verbs come from Anglo-Saxon. What you find in languages is the pronunciation changes. What's really interesting about ancient Greek is that most modern Greek readers and speakers can read ancient Greek. Can't pronounce it. They can read it, which is really interesting. The same thing with Hebrew. You know, we don't even know how Hebrew is really pronounced. I don't know if I'll talk much about Hebrew writing, but you know, until they added Masoretic text, the Masoretes added the pointlets in the vowels. We have no idea. Hebrew was basically a dead language that was said only in the synagogues. And we have no idea how it's pronounced. We have no idea how they said the word Jehovah, that is, you know, Yahweh, God, because they didn't speak that word. Languages change in the way that the words mean, but they also change in pronunciation. And the reason I bring that up is because if you are a Koine Greek studier, I do classical. So my pronunciations may sound different than what you've heard. If you do modern Greek, my pronunciations may sound a little different. Okay? That's okay. Remember, you got 4 choices. Pick one you like. Pick the ones you don't like. You know, throw them out. It's okay. Now, we're talking about a document in antiquity. And I'll get into a lot of detail about this because this is really important to understand. These are documents in antiquity prior to the printing press. You know, Gutenberg invented that thing 1450. I'll put Common Era, that's AD, okay? CE, Common Era, and BCE, before the Common Era. That's kind of what the academic world does, okay? They mean AD, BC. You know, it's just, I give these classes to a lot of different groups. So, you know, you don't want to make one unhappy or one more happy than the other, right? So everybody can be the same unhappy. The New Testament documents, and I usually refer to them as documents because, for example, if you take a Holy Bible to work, somebody might be offended, right? But if you take a collection of the New Testament, Old Testament documents to work, can anybody be offended? No. So I call them New Testament, Old Testament documents. I think it's a good way to go. Because they're 27 separate historical works. We think of them as a single book, but they're not. The Acts is an independent historical work. It just happens to be in a collection that we have we call the Bible. And by the way, it's really not a Bible. Biblios in Greek is papyrus, and it's not papyrus in those cases. Historical documents, because they are historical documents written in Greek. And that's another thing we're going to look at. Next week we'll look at the historicity of the document itself, which is incredibly important. Whenever you go to history class, the number one thing that your history professor should do is prove the veracity of the text he's using. Because if he doesn't, why would you study the text in the first place, right? If it's not historical, if it's not verifiable, if it has no veracity, right? So I think as we look at any document in antiquity, we have to discover the veracity of it. Manuscripts, let's see, I got a lot more to talk about manuscripts next week that's really important. Let's talk about the Greek language. More about the Greek language. I love the Greek language. It's one of my favorite subjects because it is really significantly different than English. It is really different than other Germanic and Romance languages, and that's what you're used to, right? Nobody's doing Sanskrit here or Hindi, right? If you speak French or you speak Spanish or you speak whatever, you're speaking a Romance language. If you speak German or Danish or Swedish. Generally, those are all Germanic languages. Anglo-Saxon is your Germanic language. Greek is significantly different. Greek is a very simple language. It's not a simplistic language, it's a simple language. It's an ancient language. It's really neat. It is, has a very sparse number of words. For example, anybody have an idea how many words English has approximately? 1 million. There are 1 million words in English. There's about 20,000 words in ancient Greek. Big difference. Many of the words in Greek describe very, very complex concepts. Matter of fact, one of my favorite words in Greek, epithumia, meta-epithumia. Meta-epithumia is my favorite words because epithumia, sometimes translated love or lust, literally means the scent of the sacrifice. We'll get into this, but people did not eat meat very often in the ancient world. 3 times a year maybe. In Athens, maybe 10 times a year. Times a year at the festivals. Because the only time you ate meat was when you sacrificed meat. Epithumia is the scent of the sacrifice. So when you smell the scent of that meat cooking, what did you do? What do you do? When you smell that barbecue cooking? Salivate. You're salivating. Epithumia, love or lust, it was a desire. And it's not lust as in lust like English lust, it's Lust as in Deutsche Lust. In other words, a strong desire for something. In German you say, ich habe Lust, means I desire. Ich habe Lust für Mittagessen, for lunch. So it means I really want to eat lunch. The same thing's about epithumia. Epithumia means I have a great desire for it. And it means the scent of the sacrifice. Do you get the connection here? Meta-epithumia, and by the way, translating it love or lust, anybody see a missing connection here? Between scent of the sacrifice making you salivate to love or lust. You're kind of missing a boat, right? Now, meta-epithumia, sometimes translated pleasure in English, means the eternal line of the smoke of the sacrifice or the scent of the sacrifice from man to God. But it's translated pleasure in English. Okay, do you see what I'm getting at here? Many times these Greek words are very, very, very complex. They have great cultural annotations. And if you miss them, what happens? You miss the whole point, right? Because Paul uses meta-epithumia and epithumia over and over again. Guess in Ephesians, I think. Incredible, important words. Because he's talking about sacrifice. Whoa. But many times in our translations, there's nothing that comes out about sacrifice. So, if we understand this language to a degree, and that's what I'm going to try to help us do, is understand the language to a degree, then we'll understand it. In modern languages, they tend to use modifiers to differentiate. You know what I'm talking about? Adverbs and adjectives. Where in Greek, what we do is we put together our words in building blocks. Suffixes. Well, you know that, right? Anybody ever taken the SAT, ACT test? What was it? You studied the prefixes and suffixes because when you put the words together in English, they mean the same thing in Greek, right? Well, kind of, right? So, it's very interesting. And by the way, a lot of our words are Greek. I'm not going to go to the point where, you know, remember the Greek wedding? My whatever Greek wedding? Yeah, where the father said every word is Greek. Kimono, it's Greek, right? Kleenex, it's Greek, right? It's not quite like that, but there's a lot of Greek words in English, and we know that because of SAT, ACT. I'm going to bring words of the day because we want to see those singular meanings, and also Greek language, ancient Greek language is based in geometric logic. Geometric logic, and I'll try to explain that. It's not complex, but it is based in geometric logic. Here's an example. These are 8 words that we translate in the New Testament, say and said. We translate all these words, say and said. There's actually more. There's about 14, but I didn't add them all because the others are just kind of redundant. Lego, rima, fimi, lelo, epo, euro, propion, and antipon. What do they mean? Well, these are the 8 words, say and said, logos. Words spoken with logic to lay out an argument in words. In other words, logical words. So if I Lego you, and it says in the Greek, this is what's really cool about Greek. Greek says, in the Greek, in Acts, I'm Legoing you. Which means what? I'm giving you a logical argument. So whenever you see the word Legos, or Lego, it means I'm giving you a logical argument. By the way, in John, it says, in the beginning was the Logos. The logical argument. And the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God. And, right? Do you know where that word comes from? Let's do a little fun digression. Every quote in the New Testament comes from where? The Septuagint version of the Old Testament. What's the Septuagint? Might want to give me a...
The Greek translation of the Old Testament.
It's the ancient Greek translation of the Old Testament. It was done about 200, 250 BC in Alexandria, and it's a translation of the Hebrew Old Testament into Greek. And I'm going to get into why this is a real important thing to really understand about Acts and the time period that we're talking about. But in that word, in that translation, in the Hebrew, it says, well, and I'm going to give you a little Hebrew here mixed with English, but it says, in the beginning was God, Elohim is the word used. Actually, that's gods with a singular verb. This is the way. Elohim is a plural noun, means gods. El is the singular. Elohim is the plural in Hebrew, with a singular verb. So indicating that Elohim is a what kind of a noun? Intended to be a singular noun. Okay? This is interesting. In the beginning was gods, and the spirit of gods, the Ruach, lay over the waters, and God amarred. Okay? I got a spirit. The Amar is the command word of God which created the universe, and I got God, Elohim. Okay. In the Greek, that is translated, in the beginning was Theos. And the pneuma of Theos lay over the waters, and God legoed. And so where John got that was, it says, in the beginning was the word, logos, the Lego, the argument of God that created the universe, which we attribute to what? To Christ. Christ is the Word. Guess what? Right? You got God, Theos, you got Spirit, Ruach, the Pneuma, and you have the Lego.
Were these translators trying to get back to a singular God instead of gods?
Elohim is a very strange word, and I don't have a lot of time to get into it, but Elohim is the word that is used for God in the Old Testament. It means gods. It's plural. But guess what? What is a triune God? It's gods with a singular verb, isn't it? Okay, all right. I'm not teaching Hebrew here, but you get the point, right? I think this is very interesting. It wasn't missed by the Old Testament scholars that translated the Septuagint, and it wasn't missed by John, right? It's the meaning of the word. Let me go on, because I've got to run out of time otherwise. Rima is a flow of words forming a narration, a command, or a dispute. Words that are poured out. Rima is words that are poured out. So if I tell you I'm rimaing you, I'm just pouring out words at you. Femi is to speak one's thoughts or opinions. So if I tell you I'm doing a femi, it's an opinion. In English, we would maybe say I'm giving you my opinion, but guess what? These are all translated Sarah said in the New Testament. Lelo are words forming an extended or random harangue. They also can be just words. For example, if I say, hey, the weather's nice today, that's a lelo. Epo, words spoken in the past. Words of the past. Eros, first eros, passive, don't worry about it. It was said. Something was said. Propion, to say before. I told you, foretold. And antipon is to say against. So if I'm disputing you. These words come out of the nature of the early culture. Early literate cultures, non-literate cultures, always begin with very concrete nouns and verbs. They move to more abstract terms and meanings as a culture changes. Remember I told you languages change? This is what changes in a language. They usually start with more concrete, and what we find in ancient Greek is very concrete. It's the most concrete language you're going to find. Languages and cultures become less concrete and more abstract. So literate cultures, early literate societies, cultures can directly trace concrete words to abstractions. Did you see that in those 8 words? Those are translating direct concrete concepts into abstractions. Post-literate vocabulary it can be completely separated from the meaning of the words. And I'm going to show you an example. Non-literate societies don't have this. For example, one of the great keys in literacy is as you become a literate culture, you become more abstract. So for example, if I say the word chair to you, what do you picture in your mind?
Chair?
Do you picture a chair? No, you don't. You picture the word chair, don't you?
Yeah.
All literate cultures, people always picture the word, not the item. Because which chair did you choose to picture in your mind? Right?
That's the problem.
If I ask you that, then it goes right. Well, I didn't think of a chair. I thought of the word chair, right? Because you're post-literate. In a pre-literate culture, what do you think they picture? I'll give you an example. When we did studies on ancient peoples that were pre-literate in today's world, we asked them about these questions. We asked them the word bear. They had the word bear in their vocabulary, in their culture. It said bear. And the answer was always, yeah, the bear I saw 10 years ago that came out, that went into Uncle Herbert's tent, or house, or hut. You see? Because when they picture bear, what do they picture? The specific concrete bear, because they don't have a word written down. We're literate. So guess what we have? When I ask you to picture the word love, what do you picture in your mind? The word love. L-O-V-E. You don't picture, how do you picture love?
Yeah, you can't.
Right? You see this? This is the difference between pre-literate and literate cultures. And what you see in early literate cultures is very concrete words. So that's what Greek and ancient Greek is, very concrete words. Here's an example in English. The word independence. Independence appears to be a word that has, it's just independence, right? Independence meaning I'm independent, I'm not dependent. Well, it comes from the word dependent, which is formed of the words de and pendant. Pendant is pendant from Middle English, meaning hanging over or overhanging. It means a hanger-on. So the word pendant, a hanger-on or a hanging pendant, right? With D, a dependent, a hanger-on, right, has been added independent, meaning not a hanger-on. But do we think that way when we think of the word independent in English? Because the word has become an abstraction that is separated in our minds from its concrete foundation. Greek isn't that way as much. What you find in ancient Greek is the words are formed concretely based on the suffixes and prefixes. So a Greek person seeing this word, they may be seeing this word for the very first time in their whole life, and guess what they can do? Know what it means immediately. Because that's the way their language works. German kind of works a little bit like that too. In any case, how important was communication to the Greeks? If you have 8, and actually there's more than 14, if you have 8 to 14 words that mean say or said, how important is communication to you as a culture? It's pretty darn important. So, all these words imply spoken communication, but they can imply a degree of written communication. There is a specific word in ancient Greek that means written communication. It's graphe. Where do we get that? Well, graphite comes from graphe, right? Graphite's what you write with a pencil. Isn't that fun? In any case, graphe is written down communication in Greek. The implication to Greek is that the communications, the words, don't change when they're written down. In other words, when I'm writing in Greek, what am I writing? The words I'm speaking. I want to speak to you. That'll become really important, you'll see. So each of these meanings has a specific, each of these words has a specific meaning. Here I'm giving you one word synopsis. Logos, truth. Rima, story. Themi, opinion. Lelos, small talk. Epo, things previously said. Ero, pronouncements. Propion, prophecy. Antiphon, disagree. All translated say or said in English. Sometimes in the same verse in English. Note the clarity of these definitions. This is marvelous. Note the meanings come out of concrete terms. I'm going to run out of time if I go into great detail, but let me give you quick ones. Telos, parabola, hyperbola, and Pythagorean theorem. These are all terms that you might think of as mathematics or geometry. These are basic terms in Greek. What's a parabola? Or here's a telos. Telos is a vanishing point. Telos is the reason in a concept of a logos. In other words, it's a conclusion. But look at it. This is what the Greeks think of it as. A vanishing point on the horizon. Woohoo! Pretty concrete and pretty geometric, if you ask me. Here's a parabola. A parabola is a logical argument with only one solution and or answer. What's a parabola in Greek? We translate it as a parable. This is a parable, guys. It's a geometric construct in Greek. How about this? Hyperbole. Hyperbola in Greek is a hyperbole in English. Hyperbole is a logos with no telos. It never touches any axis. In other words, there's no conclusion. Right? That's what a hyperbole kind of is in English. In Greek, this is exactly what it means. A Pythagorean theorem. You know what this is? A squared plus b squared equals c squared. Now, the Greeks didn't have algebra. They only had geometry. Now, how you figure out with geometry, I don't know. But remember the Pythagorean theorem? That'll become important in a second. Here's manuscript. Let's look at this manuscript. Can you read that? I can't read that. Those are articles. Those are small text, Greek. But that's what the manuscripts basically look like. They're similar to other ancient manuscripts. Grammar is key. They are mnemonics. People did not read in the ancient world. They used mnemonics. What's a mnemonic?
Symbol.
Well, it's something that lets you remember exactly something else. So what the ancient texts are mnemonics, because they didn't want to forget. They were taking written communication and putting it on paper for what purpose? To save it, to pass it on to someone. The way it worked, and let me do this as quickly as I can. If I wanted to write a letter to somebody in the ancient period, I would hire a guy that's called a scribe is our Hebrew translation, but the word, man, what, I was just talking about this yesterday, or Sunday, in Greek, oh man, I want to say graphia, but it may be graphia. Anyway, I hire a guy, it's a graphia. It's a guy that writes down this stuff. Because even if you can read and write, do you read and write in ancient world? No. You hire people to do that. So you have this guy come to your house, the graphius. He comes to your house, he brings vellum and parchment, he brings the expensive stuff and the cheap stuff. And he says, which one do you want? And you say, well, I want the cheap stuff, you know. So you get the papyrus. And so he starts writing for you, and he writes it on with a brush, because there's no ink pens, they're not invented yet, and he's writing with a brush because papyrus and also vellum's kind of smooth, but they didn't have paper like our smooth paper, can't write out very well. So he's writing with a brush, and he takes your words and writes them down with no spaces, no punctuation, no sentences, no paragraph, no verses, no chapters. It's all squished together. Why? He's writing mnemonics. After he finishes writing everything you tell him to, and fixing and whatever, he goes back through it and reads it back to you, and you say, I'm happy. And then guess what you do?
How can he read it back to you?
Because he's memorized.
Okay.
It's mnemonics.
Yeah.
All ancient writing is memorized.
Yeah.
That's the point. These guys are pretty quick with the minds, but it's written on the